The alarm bells rang through the massive space station like thunder rolling across the metal halls. Tae-ho pressed his four-fingered hand against the cold window and watched the emergency lights flash red across the darkness of space. His blue skin looked pale in the harsh light, and his tall frame shook slightly as more ships arrived at the station. Every species in the galaxy was sending their best people to this meeting, and that meant something terrible was happening. The Galactic Council had not called an emergency meeting in over 200 years. The last time was when the plague ships had threatened to destroy all life in 3 star systems. This time felt different, though, more desperate somehow. Tae-ho could feel it in the way the other ambassadors moved through the halls, their voices hushed and their steps quick. He walked through the curved corridors of Nexus Prime, the largest space station ever built. The walls stretched up so high that clouds formed near the ceiling, and the artificial gravity made it feel like walking on a real planet. Millions of beings lived and worked here, but today the station felt empty and cold. Everyone was hiding, in their quarters or gathering in small groups to whisper about what was coming. The council chamber was a massive dome that could hold representatives from every known species in the galaxy. Today it was packed full, with beings of every shape and size filling the floating platforms that moved slowly around the center stage. Some looked like giant insects, others like walking trees, and many looked so strange that Tae-ho could not even guess what their homeworlds might be like. Bo-Ra stood near the center stage, her small frame making her look lost among the crowd of much larger beings. Her people, the Jorians, were one of the newest species to join the galactic community. They looked almost like humans, but with silver skin that seemed to glow softly in the light. She was young for an ambassador, maybe only 50 years old in Galactic Standard Time, and her large eyes showed the fear that everyone in the chamber could feel. The meeting began when the great speakers came to life with a sound like distant thunder. Elder Vrix, the current council leader, spoke in the old formal language that all species had to learn to join the galactic community. His words echoed through the chamber as translation devices whispered the meaning into thousands of different languages at the same time. "We gather in darkness," Elder Vrix said, his ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The Rithak hegemony has declared war upon the Jorian people. They demand complete surrender within 30 solar cycles, or they will begin the systematic destruction of every Jorian world." The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives began shouting in dozens of languages, their voices mixing together into a sound like an angry storm. Some called for immediate military action, others demanded proof of the Rithak claims, and many simply sat in stunned silence. The Rithak had not fought a major war in over 500 years, but their reputation for brutality was known throughout the galaxy. Tae-ho watched as Bo-Ra stepped forward to address the council. Her voice was small but clear as she spoke into the microphone that would carry her words to every corner of the chamber. "My people have done nothing to provoke this attack," she said, and Tae-ho could hear the tears in her voice even though she was trying to stay strong. "We have no military fleet, no weapons of war, no way to defend ourselves. The Rithaks say we have settled on worlds that belong to them, but these worlds were empty when we arrived. We have built cities and farms, schools and hospitals. We have children who were born under alien suns and know no other home." She paused and looked around the chamber at all the different species watching her. "We ask for your help not as conquerors or warriors, but as parents and teachers and artists who want to live in peace. If the council cannot help us, then my people will die, and all our songs and stories will die with us." The chamber fell silent as Bo-Ra stepped back. Elder Vrix called for military advisors to present their analysis of the situation. Kyung-min, the old Velkari strategist, moved slowly to the center stage. His people were known throughout the galaxy as the greatest military minds, and his advice had helped win dozens of conflicts over the centuries. Kyung-min activated the holographic display that showed the current military situation. The images that appeared above the center stage made everyone in the chamber gasp. The Rithak fleet was massive, with thousands of bioships that looked like giant sea creatures floating through space. Each ship was alive, able to heal itself when damaged and grow new weapons when needed. "The Rithak possess overwhelming superiority in every category," Kyung-min said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Their bioships can regenerate from damage that would destroy our vessels completely. Their plasma weapons can cut through our best shields like they were made of paper. Their numbers are at least 10 times larger than any fleet we could assemble. He showed tactical simulations that played out above the chamber like deadly fireworks. Every scenario ended the same way, with the combined fleets of the Galactic Council being destroyed in a matter of hours. The Rethak had spent centuries perfecting their art of war, and no conventional force could stand against them. "What about unconventional forces?" asked Wu Jin, the representative from the Thraxian Empire. His insect-like face clicked and buzzed as he spoke, and his 6 arms gestured wildly at the holographic display. "What about weapons that the Rethak have never faced before?" The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Everyone knew what Wu Jin was suggesting, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Finally, a small voice from the back of the chamber spoke the words that everyone was thinking. "What about the humans?" The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the chamber began shouting at once, some in anger and others in fear. The very mention of humanity in a military context was enough to send waves of panic through the assembled representatives. Wu Jin slammed his clawed hands against his platform and screamed above the noise. "Absolutely not. Have you all forgotten what happened at Kepler, the asteroid belt massacre? When humans go to war, entire star systems become graveyards!" Other voices joined in, recounting the horror stories that every species in the galaxy knew by heart. The humans had fought each other in wars so brutal that they had made 3 planets completely uninhabitable. They had weapons that could crack moons and tactics so ruthless that even mentioning them was considered disturbing to most civilized species. But Hei Wan, a young Jorian diplomat who had been silent until now, stood up on her platform and spoke in a voice that shook with emotion. "But our children will die," she said, and her words cut through the arguing like a knife. "Our entire species will be wiped out. Surely even human warfare is better than complete extinction." The chamber fell silent as her words sank in. Everyone knew the stories about human brutality, but they also knew that humanity had never committed genocide against another species. Their wars were terrible, but they had never tried to completely destroy another civilization. Elder Vrix called for order and opened the floor for formal debate. For hours, representatives argued back and forth about the wisdom of involving humanity in galactic affairs. Some pointed out that humans had been restricted from most of the galaxy, specifically because of their violent nature. Others argued that desperate times called for desperate measures. Taeho listened to the debate and felt a cold fear growing in his chest. He had seen recordings of human battles, had studied their tactics and weapons in military academy. Humans fought with a creativity and brutality that no other species could match, but they also had a strange code of honor that sometimes led them to protect the weak. The question was whether that protection was worth the price they would demand in return. As the debate raged on, emergency reports continued to flood into the chamber. The Rethak fleets were already moving toward Jorian space, and their bioships were growing larger and more dangerous as they prepared for war. Time was running out, and every hour of delay meant more Jorian worlds would fall under the shadow of approaching death. Finally, as the station's artificial day cycle began to fade into night, Elder Vrix called for a preliminary vote. The question was simple, but terrifying. Should the Galactic Council formally request military assistance from humanity? The vote was close, closer than anyone had expected, but in the end, fear of extinction won out over fear of human warfare. Bo-Ra stood in the center of the chamber as the vote was announced, tears streaming down her silver cheeks. She had saved her people, but at what cost? As the representatives began to file out of the chamber, she whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. "Please let us be doing the right thing." The journey to human space took 3 days through the fastest hyperspace lanes in the galaxy. But to Taeho, it felt like 3 years. He sat in the passenger cabin of the diplomatic vessel, watching the stars blur past the windows and trying not to think about what they were about to do. Beside him, Bo-Ra stared at a datapad that showed the latest reports from Jorian space, her silver skin growing paler with each update. The Rethak fleets had begun their advance exactly as promised. 2 outer colonies had already gone silent, their communication arrays destroyed by the massive bioships that moved through space like hungry sharks. The estimated time until the first major population centers came under attack was less than 20 days, and every simulation showed that the Jorian defense forces would last maybe 6 hours against a full Rethak assault. Their ship, the diplomatic cruiser Harmony, was escorted by a full squadron of Velkari fighters as they approached the border of human space. Taeho had insisted on the escort, not because he feared human attack, but because he wanted to project strength during the upcoming negotiations. Humans respected power, and showing up defenseless would put them at a disadvantage before talks even began. The first sign that they had entered human territory was the immediate appearance of automated defense platforms that seemed to come out of nowhere. Within seconds of crossing the invisible border, their ship was surrounded by dozens of sleek metal objects that looked like deadly flowers blooming in the darkness of space. Warning messages flooded their communication systems in perfect galactic standard language, demanding identification and stating their business. Captain June, the Velkari pilot of their diplomatic vessel, responded with all the proper codes and diplomatic credentials. The defense platforms remained in position for several long minutes, while invisible scanners examined every molecule of their ship. Finally, clearance came through, but the platforms continued to follow them as they flew deeper into human space. Tae-ho had studied human territory from a distance for years, but seeing it up close was a completely different experience. The space around every star was filled with industrial structures that defied easy description. Massive shipyards hung in the darkness like metal cities, building vessels of war that were larger than most space stations. Mining operations stripped entire asteroids down to their cores in a matter of days, feeding raw materials to factories that never seemed to stop working. But it was the signs of past conflicts that truly unnerved the diplomatic party. They passed through the Centauri system, where humans had fought each other in a civil war that had lasted 50 years. 3 planets in the system were still glowing with residual radiation from weapons that had been designed to crack continental plates. The space around the 4th planet was filled with the broken remains of warships so large that their debris had formed artificial asteroid belts. Bora pointed at one of the derelict vessels floating past their window. "That ship is bigger than our entire home fleet," she whispered, and her voice carried the same tone that other species might use when speaking of natural disasters or divine punishment. The human escort that met them at the edge of the Sol system was deliberately intimidating. 6 heavy cruisers took positions around the Harmony, their hulls bristling with weapon systems that looked like they had been designed by engineers who enjoyed their work far too much. The human ships moved with a grace that seemed impossible for objects of their size, sliding through space like dancers who happened to be armed with enough firepower to level cities. Terra Nova, the administrative capital of human space, was a world that had been completely transformed by human engineering. The original planet had been a barren rock with no atmosphere, but humans had given it air and water and vast cities that stretched from pole to pole. The orbital facilities around the planet were even more impressive, with massive rings that spun slowly to provide artificial gravity and docking bays that could accommodate ships the size of small moons. Their ship was guided to a diplomatic landing pad that was itself larger than most space stations. As they disembarked, Taeho noticed that the human guards who met them were all augmented with mechanical limbs and enhanced organs that made them look more like living weapons than people. Their escort leader, a woman who introduced herself only as Lieutenant Yi, had eyes that glowed with internal displays and an arm that was obviously mechanical but worked with perfect precision. The ride to the Human Defense Administration building gave them their first close look at human society. The cities were massive and efficient, with transportation systems that moved millions of people at speeds that would have been considered dangerous by any other species. But it was the casual way that humans dealt with violence that struck the visitors most forcefully. Military recruiting stations stood on street corners next to coffee shops, and advertisements for weapons manufacturers played on public screens between weather reports and entertainment news. The Human Defense Administration building was a fortress, disguised as an office complex. The walls were thick enough to withstand orbital bombardment, and the security systems that scanned the visitors were more thorough than anything the Galactic Council used to protect their most sensitive facilities. But the most intimidating aspect of the building was how normal it all seemed to the humans who worked there. Admiral Dongwu met them in a conference room that overlooked the planet's largest military shipyard. He was an older human with gray, hair and scars that told stories of conflicts fought in places that most species had never heard of. His left arm was completely mechanical, a replacement for whatever had been lost in some long-ago battle, and it moved with the smooth precision of advanced military hardware. Standing beside him was Captain Nari, a younger woman whose augmented spine gave her perfect posture and whose enhanced reflexes made her seem to move slightly faster than normal time. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight and expected never to lose one in the future. "So," Admiral Dongwu said after the formal introductions were complete, "you want us to fight the Rithak hegemony?" His voice was carefully neutral, but Taeho could hear the amusement beneath the surface. "The same Galactic Council that imposed military restrictions on humanity after the Proxima campaign? The same organization that called us violent primitives and galactic barbarians?" Taeho felt his diplomatic training take over as he tried to navigate the dangerous conversation. "The Council's previous judgments may have been hasty," he said carefully. "The situation has changed, and we now face a threat that requires unconventional solutions." Captain Nari laughed, and the sound was not entirely pleasant. "Unconventional solutions," she repeated. "Is that what we're calling human warfare these days?" Bora stepped forward, her desperation overriding diplomatic protocol. "Please," she said, and her voice broke as she spoke. "My people are dying. The Rithak fleets are already moving toward our worlds, and we have no way to stop them. We have children, families, entire civilizations that will be wiped out if no one helps us." Admiral Dongwu studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "We know what sentient life looks like," he said finally. "The question is not whether your people deserve to live. The question is what humanity gains by helping you live." The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in Taeho's diplomatic experience. Humans did not bargain like other species, with careful offers and counteroffers that gradually moved toward compromise. Instead, they presented their demands with the casual certainty of people who knew they held all the power in the room. They wanted complete operational autonomy during any military action, with no interference from the Galactic Council regarding tactics or targets. They wanted the immediate removal of all military restrictions that had been placed on humanity after their previous conflicts. They wanted formal recognition as a Tier 1 galactic power, with all the trading rights and territorial privileges that such status provided. Most disturbing of all, they wanted permanent military bases in 3 strategic star systems, including one that was uncomfortably close to the Galactic Council's administrative center. When Taeho protested that such demands were completely unreasonable, Captain Nari simply shrugged and pointed out the window at the massive warships being constructed in the orbital yards below. "Those are the terms," Admiral Dongwu said with finality. "Accept them, or explain to the Jorian people why their extinction was preferable to giving humanity what it has always deserved anyway." As they argued, reports continued to arrive from Jorian space. The Rithak advance was proceeding ahead of schedule, with bioships appearing in system after system like a plague of mechanical locusts. The Jorian defense forces were falling back toward their core worlds, but everyone knew that retreat was just delaying the inevitable. Finally, with time running out and no other options remaining, Taeho accepted the human demands. The formal agreements were signed in a ceremony that felt more like a surrender than a diplomatic triumph, with human officials who smiled politely while their warships moved into position around the planet like predators claiming new territory. Bo-Ra stood at the window of their quarters that night, watching the lights of the human military installations twinkle across the planet's surface. The transformation of human space began within hours of the agreements being signed. What had seemed like a peaceful industrial region suddenly revealed itself to be the largest military machine in galactic history. Hidden facilities that had been disguised as mining operations or research stations came alive with purpose, and the space around every human world filled with warships that emerged from concealment like predators stepping out of shadows. Taeho and Bora watched from the observation deck of their diplomatic quarters as the mobilization unfolded before their eyes. The shipyards that had been building cargo vessels and passenger liners suddenly retracted false panels to reveal weapons systems being installed on military hulls. What they had thought were commercial space stations turned out to be massive ammunition depots and supply centers that had been hidden in plain sight. The speed of the mobilization was terrifying in its efficiency. Within 12 hours, the first wave of human warships was ready for deployment. Within 24 hours, a fleet larger than anything the Galactic Council had ever assembled was moving toward the jump gate that would take them to Jorian space. The humans had not just been preparing for this war. They had been preparing for every possible war, and their readiness spoke of a military culture that thought about conflict the way other species thought about agriculture or trade. Jae-hyun, the human fleet coordinator, moved through the command center with the casual efficiency of someone conducting a routine training exercise. His augmented brain processed thousands of data streams simultaneously, coordinating ship movements and supply lines with a precision that made the observers feel like they were watching a machine disguised as a person. Every order he gave was acknowledged instantly. Every resource he requested appeared exactly when and where he needed it. Phase 1 deployment is complete, Jae-hyun reported to Admiral Dong-woo, his voice carrying no more emotion than a weather report. Dreadnought squadrons are moving to assault positions. Heavy cruiser wings are establishing perimeter control, and logistics support is maintaining full operational readiness across all deployment zones. The scale of the human response became clear as more ships continued to emerge from hidden facilities. The flagship of the fleet, the HSS Retribution, was a vessel so large that it had its own gravitational field. Its hull was covered with weapons, systems that looked like they had been designed by engineers who took personal offense at the existence of enemy targets. Escort vessels clustered around it like pilot fish following a shark, each one larger and more heavily armed than the most powerful warships in the Galactic Council fleet. Captain Min-ho of the heavy cruiser Vengeance gave his crew briefing in a tone that mixed professional competence with barely contained enthusiasm. His ship was one of hundreds in the assault fleet, but it carried enough firepower to level a continent and enough armor to survive direct hits from weapons that would vaporize conventional vessels. The crew that listened to his briefing showed the same calm efficiency that seemed to characterize all human military personnel. Intelligence indicates that Rythak bioships regenerate from conventional damage, Min-ho explained to his officers, as tactical displays showed enemy vessel configurations. Standard kinetic weapons, energy beams, and explosive ordnance will slow them down but not stop them permanently. Conventional solutions are clearly inadequate for this engagement. So Young, the ship's tactical officer, activated weapon system displays that made the alien observers physically ill. Antimatter torpedoes that could crack planetary crusts. Gravity bombs that collapsed space-time itself into artificial black holes. Molecular disruptors that unraveled the basic structure of matter at the quantum level. And perhaps most disturbing of all, the humans discussed these weapons with the same tone that farmers might use to discuss different types of fertilizer. The enemy's regenerative capabilities are biological in nature, So Young continued, highlighting weak points in Rythak ship designs that no other species had ever noticed. Disrupting cellular structure at the molecular level should prevent regeneration and ensure permanent target elimination. Gravity weapons will be particularly effective against their organic hulls, as biological matter cannot maintain structural integrity when exposed to artificial gravitational stress. The alien. Diplomats watched in growing horror as the briefing continued. Each weapon system seemed designed to counter not just Rythak capabilities, but to do so in ways that were specifically chosen for their psychological impact. The humans were not just planning to win the war, they were planning to win it in a way that would ensure no one ever wanted to fight them again. Admiral Dong-woo found Tae-ho and Bo-ra in the observation lounge later that evening, watching the final preparations for deployment. The space around Terra Nova was now filled with more military hardware than most species possessed in their entire fleets, and all of it was preparing to leave for a war that most of the galaxy hoped would end quickly. Having second thoughts? The Admiral asked, settling into a chair beside them with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted the outcome of any conflict he had ever entered. Bo-ra turned to look at him, her silver skin pale in the artificial light. Admiral, your fleet is impressive. But the Rythak have conquered 17 species over the past 5 centuries. They have never been defeated in battle, never retreated from a fight, never shown mercy to any enemy. Are you certain that even human weapons can stop them? Dongwoo smiled, and the expression was somehow more unsettling than if he had shown anger or concern. Captain, The Rithak have never faced weapons like ours because no one else has ever needed to build weapons like ours. Most species fight wars to achieve political objectives or gain territory or resources. Humans fight wars to make sure that our enemies never want to fight us again. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the fleet that was preparing for departure. Your people called us violent primitives, and in a way you were right. We are primitive enough to believe that the best way to end a war is to make it so terrible that no one ever wants to start another one. We are violent enough to build weapons that other species consider immoral just to think about. Taeho felt a chill run through his body as he listened to the Admiral's words. And if you lose? If the Rithak prove stronger than even human military might? Then the galaxy will learn what human desperation looks like, Dongwu replied calmly. And I promise you that will be far worse than anything we're planning to do to the Rithak. The departure of the human fleet was a spectacle that would be remembered throughout galactic history. Hundreds of warships moved in perfect formation through space, their engines leaving trails of distorted space-time that made the stars shimmer, like heat mirages. The fleet moved with a precision and purpose that spoke of long practice and absolute confidence in their abilities. As the last ships disappeared into the jump gate that would take them to Jorian space, the human officials who remained behind seemed almost disappointed that they would miss the coming battle. Captain Nari watched the departure with the expression of someone who was being left behind during the most interesting part of a fascinating experiment. How long do you think it will take? Taeho asked, unable to keep the question inside any longer. Nari checked her chronometer with casual precision. The Rithak fleet consists of approximately 4,000 bioships arranged in standard attack formation. Accounting for travel time and enemy response patterns, I estimate the conflict will be resolved within 72 hours after first contact. And the Jorian casualties? Bora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Minimal, Nari replied with the confidence of someone stating an obvious fact. Human doctrine prioritizes the protection of allied civilian populations. Your people will be safer during this war than they were during peacetime. As the human fleet vanished into hyperspace, carrying with it enough destructive power to sterilize solar systems, the alien diplomats were left to contemplate what they had unleashed. They had asked for salvation, and humanity had responded, with overwhelming force that promised to reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. In the distance, the human shipyards continued their work, building replacement vessels for the ones that had just departed. The humans were already planning for the next war, the next crisis, the next opportunity to demonstrate why they were the apex predators of known space. Bora whispered a prayer to her ancestors as she watched the stars return to their normal appearance. Please let us have made the right choice, she said, knowing that it was already too late to change anything, and that the galaxy would soon learn what human warfare really looked like when it was unleashed without restraint. War Master Grixtol stood in the command chamber of his flagship, the bioship Devourer of Worlds, and felt the satisfying pulse of living weapons preparing for battle. His species, the Rithak, had evolved from pack hunters on a world where only the most ruthless survived, and over 5 centuries of conquest, they had refined their art of war to a level that no other species could match. His mantis-like body was covered in natural armor that had been enhanced with biomechanical implants, and his 4 arms moved with precise coordination as he reviewed the tactical situation. The Jorian species would fall within days, just like all the others. His scouts had confirmed that their pathetic defense fleet consisted of outdated vessels with primitive weapons that could barely scratch the hull of a Rithak bioship. The plan was simple and proven. Overwhelming force, rapid strikes against population centers, and the systematic destruction of any resistance until complete surrender was achieved. War Master called his tactical coordinator a younger Rithak, whose scarred carapace showed evidence of many successful battles. Long-range sensors are detecting an approaching fleet, configuration unknown but estimated size is significant. Grixtol's compound eyes focused on the holographic display that showed the approaching vessels. The ships looked strange, angular, and metallic, rather than the organic curves that characterized most galactic military designs. But size and numbers were what mattered in space combat, and he commanded 4,000 bioships that had never known defeat. "Identify the species," he ordered, his voice carrying the clicking undertones that marked him as dominant in Rethak society. "Prepare standard engagement protocols." The answer came back within minutes, and for the first time in decades, Grixtal felt something that might have been concern. "The vessels are identified as human in origin, War Master. Intelligence files indicate this species has been restricted from military operations by the Galactic Council due to excessive force deployment in previous conflicts." Grixtal dismissed the concern with a gesture of his upper arms. Humans were mammals, soft creatures that had achieved space travel through technology rather than natural evolution. Their reputation for violence was probably exaggerated by species that had never faced real warriors. The Rethak had conquered civilizations that could reshape matter at the atomic level and had defeated fleets that commanded the power of stars themselves. The first engagement occurred at the edge of the Bellona system, where a Rethak scouting force of 200 bioships encountered the leading elements of the human fleet. Grixtal expected the encounter to follow standard patterns. The enemies would attempt long-range bombardment, his ships would close to optimal fighting distance, and superior Rethak tactics would prevail through overwhelming aggression. Instead, the humans opened fire at a range that should have been impossible for effective weapons targeting. Beams of coherent energy that looked like solid bars of light reached across space to touch his bioships, and where they hit, the living vessels simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not damaged, but unmade at such a fundamental level that even their regenerative capabilities could not respond. "What kind of weapon does that?" his tactical coordinator asked, staring at the sensor readings that showed empty space where proud bioships had been moments before. Before Grixtal could answer, the human ships demonstrated their second surprise. Missiles that moved faster than anything in Rethak experience swarmed toward his remaining scouts. But these were not conventional explosives. When they detonated, they created expanding spheres of absolute destruction that unraveled matter at the molecular level, leaving behind only fundamental particles that drifted in space like cosmic dust. The few bioships that survived the initial barrage attempted to close the distance for traditional combat. But the humans had anticipated this tactic as well. Gravity weapons that twisted space itself into impossible shapes caught the approaching vessels and compressed them into objects so dense that they collapsed under their own weight, becoming miniature black holes that consumed themselves and everything around them. Commander Seok Jin of the human heavy cruiser, Devastation watched the engagement unfold with professional satisfaction. His ship alone mounted enough firepower to sterilize a planet, and the weapons he was using against the Rethak had been specifically designed for enemies whose regenerative capabilities made conventional warfare ineffective. "Target the command. Vessels first," he ordered his weapons officer, a young woman named Yoon Hee, whose augmented reflexes allowed her to coordinate multiple weapons systems simultaneously. "We want the survivors to see their leadership being systematically eliminated, but the humans had brought more than advanced weapons to this fight. They had brought a psychological warfare doctrine that was designed to break enemy morale before physical destruction became necessary. Seok Jin activated the broadband communication system that would ensure every Rethak in the system could hear what was happening to their fleet. "This is Commander Seok Jin of the Human Defense Fleet." His voice echoed across every frequency that Rethak bioships used for communication. "You are trespassing in space, claimed by allies of humanity. Withdraw, immediately, or we will demonstrate why the Galactic Council considers human warfare to be a threat to civilized existence." The response from the Rethak was predictable. Threats, challenges, and declarations of superiority that had worked against every other species they had ever encountered. Seok Jin listened to their posturing with the patience of someone who had heard similar words from dozens of different enemies, all of whom had learned the same lesson in the end. "Very well," he replied calmly. "Begin demonstration of Protocol 7. What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a systematic dissection of Rethak military doctrine by an enemy that had studied their tactics for decades and developed specific counters for every strategy they might employ. Bioships that attempted to regenerate from damage found themselves targeted by weapons that prevented cellular reconstruction at the quantum level. Vessels that tried to use their superior numbers for swarming attacks discovered that human point defense systems could track and eliminate thousands of targets simultaneously. Grixtal watched his scouting force being destroyed with a growing sense of disbelief that gradually transformed into something no Rethak had felt in 5 centuries of conquest. Fear. These humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and tactical brilliance that exceeded anything in his experience. But more disturbing was their obvious enjoyment of the process. "They are broadcasting the battle on all frequencies," his communications specialist reported, her voice shaking with an emotion that Rithak biology was barely capable of experiencing. "They want everyone to see what they are doing to us." The AC final ship of the scouting force died when human gravity weapons created a localized space-time distortion that folded the bioship in half along dimensions that should not have existed. The death scream of the living vessel echoed across Rithak communication networks, carrying with it a message that no Rithak fleet had ever received. Retreat or face complete annihilation. For the first time in Rethak military history, a fleet commander gave the order to withdraw. But the humans were not finished with their demonstration. As the surviving bioships attempted to escape, human pursuit vessels followed them through hyperspace, broadcasting continuous updates of the retreat on frequencies that could be received throughout Rethak space. Hyo Jin, the communications officer aboard the human flagship, intercepted and translated the Rethak transmissions with growing satisfaction. The enemy communications were filled with panic, confusion, and something that might have been despair. "They are calling us demons," she reported to Admiral Chang Min, who commanded the human fleet from the bridge of the HSS Retribution. "They say our weapons are cursed, that we fight with the power of dead gods, that their bioships scream in languages that should not exist." Chang Min nodded with approval. "Excellent. Continue broadcasting the engagement recordings on all Rethak frequencies. Make sure every bioship in their fleet knows exactly what happened here." The psychological impact of the Bologna engagement spread through Rethak space faster than the fleeing survivors could travel. For 5 centuries, the Rethak had built their empire on the foundation of absolute military superiority, convincing conquered species that resistance was futile because Rethak victory was inevitable. Now, for the first time, they faced an enemy that was not just stronger, but stronger in ways that violated their fundamental understanding of how warfare was supposed to work. As the human fleet advanced deeper into the combat zone, more Rithak forces attempted to stop them. Each engagement followed the same pattern: overwhelming human technological superiority combined with tactical innovations that turned Rithak strengths into weaknesses. Bioships that had regenerated from damage for centuries found themselves facing weapons that prevented healing at the cellular level. Swarming tactics that had overwhelmed dozens of species were countered by point defense systems that could eliminate thousands of targets without missing a single shot. But perhaps most disturbing to the Rethak was the casual efficiency with which humans conducted their warfare. 3 months after the first human warship had entered Rethak space, the war was over. Not concluded, not negotiated to an end, but over in the most complete sense that galactic civilization had ever witnessed. The Rithak hegemony, which had terrorized the galaxy for 5 centuries, had surrendered unconditionally after losing 97% of their military forces in engagements that could barely be called battles. The Galactic Council reconvened in the same chamber where they had made their desperate decision to call for human assistance. But the mood was completely different now. Where before there had been fear and desperation, now there was a silence that spoke of profound shock and growing concern about what they had unleashed upon the galaxy. Bora stood at the center of the chamber to deliver her report on the fate of her people. Her silver skin had regained its healthy glow, and her voice was strong as she addressed the assembled representatives. But her large eyes held shadows that had not been there before the war began. "The Jorian species is safe," she announced, and the words should have been cause for celebration throughout the chamber. "Not a single civilian died during the human military campaign. Our worlds remain intact, our cities undamaged, our children able to play under alien suns without fear of death from above." She paused and looked around the chamber at all the different species that had voted to save her people. "But I must also report that the Rithak hegemony no longer exists as a military or political entity. Their bioship fleets have been eliminated, Their leadership has been captured or killed, and their surviving population has been relocated to designated worlds under direct human supervision. The chamber remained silent as the implications of her words sank in. The Rithak had been one of the most powerful species in galactic history, commanding resources and territory that spanned hundreds of star systems. Now, they were effectively prisoners in their own space, dependent on human goodwill for their continued survival. Admiral Dongwu entered the chamber with the same casual confidence he had shown during their first meeting on Terra Nova, but now that confidence carried weight that it had not possessed before. He was no longer just a representative of humanity's military forces. He was the spokesman for the species that had just demonstrated its ability to eliminate any threat in the galaxy with overwhelming efficiency. Captain Nari accompanied him, her augmented spine giving her perfect posture as she carried data pads that contained the formal terms of Rithak's surrender. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had recently returned from a successful hunting expedition, and her enhanced reflexes made her seem to exist slightly ahead of normal time. "Members of the Galactic Council," Admiral Dongwu began, his voice carrying the same neutral tone he might use to discuss weather patterns or cargo schedules. "The threat posed by the Rithak hegemony has been neutralized. Their biological weapons technology has been confiscated and destroyed. Their military leadership has been eliminated, and their surviving population has been relocated to worlds where they can be properly supervised." Taeho felt compelled to ask the question that everyone in the chamber was thinking but afraid to voice. "Admiral, your forces showed remarkable restraint regarding civilian populations during the campaign. Was this mercy?" Dongwu paused at the podium, and for a moment his expression became something that might have been amused. "Counselor, there is a significant difference between mercy and efficiency. Dead civilians cannot tell stories about what happens when someone threatens. Human allies, living Rithak survivors will ensure that this particular mistake is never repeated by any species in the galaxy." The Admiral activated the holographic display system to show the current military situation throughout former Rithak space. Human naval bases now occupied strategic positions in dozens of star systems, their weapons platforms capable of monitoring and controlling ship movements across vast regions of the galaxy. The speed with which these installations had been constructed suggested that humans had been planning for this expansion long before the war had even begun. "The Rithak biological technology has been quarantined to prevent its use by other hostile species," Nari added, her voice carrying the professional satisfaction of someone reporting the successful completion of a difficult project. "Their former territories are now under human administrative control to ensure continued galactic stability." Elder Vrix, who had presided over the Council's decision to request human assistance, spoke with a voice that shook slightly with age and something that might have been regret. "And now, Admiral, what does humanity want from the galaxy in recognition of your service to the Jorian people?" The answer came in the form of a formal document that Nari presented to the Council with ceremonial precision. The terms were not suggestions or requests. They were statements of fact about how galactic politics would function from this point forward. Humanity demanded exclusive mining rights to all former Rithak territories, regions that contained some of the richest mineral deposits in the galaxy. They wanted the establishment of permanent human naval bases in 15 strategic star systems, including 3 that were uncomfortably close to the Galactic Council's administrative centers. Most significantly, they demanded a permanent seat on the Council's Security Committee with full veto power over any military actions that might affect human interests. The chamber erupted in protests and arguments as representatives from dozens of species realized what they had traded for Jorian survival. Humanity had not just won a war, they had used that victory to position themselves as the dominant military power in galactic civilization. The restrictions that had been placed on human expansion after their previous conflicts were now meaningless, swept away by the undeniable demonstration of their superior capabilities. Wu Jin of the Thraxian Empire slammed his clawed appendages against his platform as he voiced what many in the chamber were thinking. "These demands are outrageous. You are asking us to surrender galactic sovereignty to a species that has just demonstrated its willingness to commit genocide." Captain Nari's response was delivered with the calm precision of someone stating obvious facts. Representative Wu Jin, Please review the casualty reports from our recent campaign. 0 civilian deaths, minimal infrastructure damage, and the preservation of Rythak cultural artifacts in designated museums. If this is your definition of genocide, then perhaps your species needs to reconsider its understanding of military terminology. The debate that followed lasted for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. Humanity now possessed the largest military force in galactic history, positioned throughout strategic systems, and commanded by leaders who had just proven their ability to eliminate any threat with casual efficiency. The choice was simple: accept human demands, or face the possibility of becoming the next species to discover what human warfare looked like when it was directed at enemies rather than allies. Kyung Min, the old Velkari strategist who had originally analyzed the hopelessness of the Rythak situation, approached Admiral Dongwu as the formal ceremonies concluded. His ancient eyes held the wisdom of someone who had studied military history for centuries, and his voice carried genuine curiosity rather than fear. "Admiral, a question if you will permit it," he said, his formal tone showing respect for human military capabilities. "During your campaign against the Rythak, your forces demonstrated considerable restraint regarding civilian populations and cultural preservation. Given your reputation for total warfare, this restraint was unexpected. Was this truly mercy?" Dongwu stopped at the chamber's exit and turned to face the old strategist. For a moment, his expression showed something that might have been genuine emotion rather than professional courtesy. "Counselor Kyung-min, humanity learned long ago that the most effective wars are those that end with your enemies afraid to fight you again rather than dead and unable to spread warnings about your capabilities. Leave Rythak survivors will spend generations telling stories about human weapons and tactics. Dead Rythak would tell no stories at all." He gestured toward the chamber where representatives from dozens of species were still arguing about the new reality of galactic politics. "Every species in this chamber now knows exactly what happens when someone threatens human allies. They have seen our capabilities demonstrated, our restraint measured, and our demands presented. This war was not about destroying the Rythak. It was about establishing humanity's position in galactic civilization." As the human delegation prepared to leave, Bo-Ra approached Admiral Dongwu with the hesitant steps of someone who was grateful, but deeply troubled by the price of her people's salvation. Her silver skin seemed to glow softly in the chamber's artificial light, and her large eyes held emotions that she was struggling to understand. "Admiral," she said quietly, "my people owe you our lives and our future. But I must ask, what has humanity become? Your weapons, your tactics, your casual discussion of systematic destruction. Is this what we should expect from our new protectors?" Dongwu studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Captain Bo-Ra, humanity has become exactly what the galaxy made us. We were called violent primitives and excluded from civilized society because our methods were considered too brutal for polite company.